Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's Wednesday, and where I'm from, it's Wet Wednesday because it's raining like a bugger. Kerri, can I say that on live stream?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. This
Okay.
is not cable or network. So, Andy, say whatever you want.
Oh, right. Well, I was remembering, because of my advanced age, I was remembering the old 70s/80s TV show WKRP in Cincinnati because Johnny Fever got thrown off the air for saying the word booger.
Oh, did he? I used to watch it, but I don't remember the episodes. So I thought it was hilarious. But I was much younger than you. So jokes went over my head, Andy.
Well, you had a lot of different languages to deal with it growing up because you were quite the world traveler, even as a, preteen, and your life
That
taking you
is
everywhere.
true. That is true, and I've forgotten most of them. But it's funny when you travel or live overseas, the first words that you learn and the last that you forget are always the inappropriate ones. So people are more than happy to teach you the curse words in any language. So I still retain some of that. Can't use any of it. So
Isn't it
yeah,
amazing? Isn't it amazing that kids almost like they know the words they're not supposed to say, right? The ones that they pick up, right?
yeah.
I remember specifically a time Deb and I doing something in the kitchen, making dinner or whatever, and our daughter Heather, who at the time was maybe 3 or 4, I'm not I'm not 100% sure how old she was. She walked into the kitchen and she went up to Deb and she said, "Mom, I've decided I'm not going to say fuck anymore."
How old was she?
3 or 4.
Oh, good,
Yeah,
good.
so
Well,
it's like, great. That's wonderful news. Thank you, honey.
well, I got to admit that my son, who took after me in more ways than I care to admit, by the time he was 3, he had been kicked out of his third daycare. And I was one of those working moms. And I remember one phone call from the daycare. They were like, "We're uncomfortable with this, but your son keeps calling everyone bitch." And we feel like maybe, his dad. And in the back of my head, I'm like, that's my favorite word. I know that he picked it up from me, but I'm like, I played it off, blamed his dad completely.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's what, most spouses do, right? If you
Yep,
can get
that's
away,
exactly right.
if you can't talk about somebody behind their back, when can you talk about them, right?
Um, in my opinion, at any time, at any time. So let's go ahead and get started because we got a
I
ton
know
of stuff to
if we
talk
want to get all the way around the world, right?
about in 1 hour.
1 hour.
1 hour. So the goal this morning was to take a break from U.S. politics, which is always the cycle way too long, and it turns into this complete circus. We ignore the issues. So let's take a break from that for a
Yes,
moment
the
because
mind numbingness. Let's take a break from the the part of the world that that's literally like Jerry Seinfeld said we're in a pandemic and there's so much going on in the world and they tell you you can't do this.
that's exactly right. Um, and I think that corporate media has the circus covered in spades for all of us. So we're going to leave that to them
Hmm.
just for today. Just for today. So there are a couple things that I wanted to highlight because when I look at patterns of behavior, there are a couple takeaways from this conversation that I hope people will pick up on. Number one is the relationship between imperialism and capitalism, corrupted capitalism. This is the idea that free market, the laissez-faire, leave the free market alone and it'll correct itself. That's complete and utter bullshit. That is the robber barons and the oligarchs trying to get you to believe that lie. So, what I want you to recognize in some of this is that imperialism and the usurpation of a population for specific goals is required in order for this corrupted capitalism to succeed. So you're going to see some of that in some of the themes here. And I want you to recognize it in your own life, especially in states here in the United States where income inequality is so high and you have a high crime rate. They have us fighting amongst each other rather than addressing the people who hold the power and make the laws. So you'll see this on an international scale. And it matters because our State Department right now has been completely gutted. If you recall, many years ago, 3.5 years ago, the majority of the State Department leadership resigned under Trump. And those positions have not been filled. So we still have Mike Pompeo leading the charge as our top diplomat in the world, which is a problem in and of itself. But all of this matters, right? And then the second theme that I want you to see, and I see it, rather than getting depressed, there's hope here because I'm seeing the global population really wake up to what's going on with this imperialism capitalism relationship. And we're starting to see that tide turn in a way that I believe is unexpected. And because it's unexpected, the oligarch is ill-equipped to stop it. So there are a couple examples I want to talk about today, and I hope you see it the way I do. If you don't, weigh in. We're live. Tell us where we're wrong. Please don't comment on our lighting. We know. Well,
let's not forget that it's still nighttime, right? In darkness, right? Because of we're a week away from going back to getting off of daylight savings time. So, it's still dark. Pretty much.
Well, pretty much. So the sun is starting to come up here in lovely New Mexico. So you can see I'm getting more and more pale.
Okay. All right. Hang on a second. I got to put the kibosh on this right now. I am not going through the entire winter with you talking about nice weather.
Too late. Although I did see that we have rain in the forecast next week. So I'm excited. Oh. I'm totally excited. So
wow, really? I thought there was a drought going on. Was it canceled?
Hopefully, that is what I'm looking forward to. Maybe the end of. They're predicting El Nino, which means dry, for all of the Southwest and parts of the East. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So. All right, you ready to get started? Let's start with Bolivia. This is the one that's in corporate media headlines, or at least quietly, because corporate media is not really happy about what's going on in Bolivia right now. And I think it's hilarious for two reasons. Number one is, if you recall, quietly, the U.S., and by the U.S. I mean Republican and Democratic leadership, was all on board for the U.S. coup and to get rid of the socialist who was in power. So Evo Morales, and I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this right. I cannot roll my R's, but Evo Morales is presently in exile in Argentina. And he was the head of Bolivia and ousted by what is a U.S.-backed coup. So they just held elections after much debate and delay, and his finance minister ran for president because Evo could not run. So his finance minister ran and won by a landslide. So there were three major candidates. So if someone didn't get a the majority vote, then it was going to go to a runoff. But they actually got over 50%. And this was evident the day of the elections. And so there was some slight calls for let's wait and let's count the votes. But it was just so overwhelming in favor of the Socialist Party and the policies that Evo had championed while he was president, that Bolivia had to call it for the Socialist Party. And that's an amazing turnout, because if you look at what was happening in Bolivia with outright authoritarianism and some of the things that were going on, where you have a president who had to go into exile in another country. That is not a stable democracy. But people turned out to vote in such numbers that it was overwhelming. That's a big deal, right? So why were we so interested in Bolivia the same way that we were meddling in Venezuela? Venezuela had oil. We get most of our oil and all of our supply from Venezuela, not necessarily the Middle East. But in Bolivia, they have lithium. And the person who actually brought this to the forefront, which was hilarious, was Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is getting dog walked on social media because he was the first one. He started it all by saying that in the US, we don't need another stimulus package for American people because us starving and being evicted and homeless and struggling through a pandemic is totally fine with Elon. He's got his money. He's okay. So he started the conversation there. And then someone else challenged him and said, well, Elon, you know what's not good is our meddling in Bolivia and the US-backed coup. Well, Elon, not to be outdone, decided to say, we will coup who we want, knowing full well and admitting that Tesla relies on the lithium that is coming from Bolivia. So here you have...
Right, and if people, just sorry to interrupt, Kerri, but just in case people aren't aware, lithium is one of the major components of high-quality batteries, right, that causes EV vehicles to run properly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's one of those alternative resources that we've been using for battery construction, and it's used in electric vehicles and a number of other places. So Elon's all for a coup that benefits his personal bottom line.
And right? I thought it was quite funny that a lot of Elon's personal friends came to his defense and said, oh, that's just his quirky sense of humor. He's just kidding.
He wasn't kidding.
No. That's bullshit.
Right. So defend him all you want. It just makes you look like an idiot too. So, so that was Elon, and I hope that Tesla is actually going to start paying taxes now. So that would be a good thing. You know, be a good corporate citizen, and take care of your employees. Make sure they have health insurance. And you know, Tesla is one of those companies where the employees were making more under the CARES Act unemployed than they were making working for Elon. So he's totally okay with that kind of capitalistic, the caustic capitalism that keeps his own employees and their families struggling, right? As well as he's a fan of coups. Not
apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and so, of course, he is a company, right? Like, I mean, we have to put that in perspective because he's one of the large corporations that has benefited hugely in terms of profits, right, during the pandemic, but in turn also turned around and decided that his employees were going to take pay cuts and lose benefits because of the pandemic as well.
Right, exactly. So here's my prediction for what comes next in corporate media headlines for Bolivia. They're going to start to tear down the new administration for GDP lack of growth. So maybe they achieve, let's say, 0.3% or 1% or 2% because they have focused inward and taken care of their own people instead of corporate international corporations. And the reason I believe you will see that because the stocks and things like that. So we know as working Americans and, you know, people around the world, stock market and the performance of the stock market and national GDP is not necessarily an indicator of how well families are doing and disposable income for families. In the UK, they actually have a measure for that. In Australia, they have a measure for that. In the US, we don't. So what you're going to start to see in Bolivia are headlines attacking the GDP, which is a national metric, instead of what's looking at disposable income for the people. So the reason I say that is because that is exactly what's happening in Mexico. So Mexico did not recently have elections. Their elections were 2 years ago, and their administration serves for 5 years. So the reason I put Mexico up here is because I think it falls in line with this trend and the theme that we're seeing. And in fact, Mexico did away with their neoliberal regime, the party that had been in power for like 70 plus years, controlling things, was swept out of power. And what was interesting is there's so many similarities between what happened in Mexico and what happened in the United States with our last election for president with Trump. Cambridge Analytica came up in Mexico, and the neocons in Mexico were saying, no, we didn't use Cambridge Analytica at all. If you recall, they were the UK firm that was doing some shady things with personal data and targeting people with propaganda and misinformation. Well, it turns out Cambridge Analytica was working with the neocons in Mexico. And what happened was they were summarily defeated. So all of that money that they poured into this nefarious political dealing didn't pay off at all. And what happened was this 70-year center-right party, or further right, was swept out of power. And what you had was the new liberal socialist leaning party actually banned neoliberal policy and repudiated it as harmful to the to the Mexican people. I wish we were doing that in America. So they recognized right away what a hardship those policies were causing for their own people. And within the first week of coming into power, decided, yeah, we're doing away with all of that, and we're going to reinvest in infrastructure, our people, education, technology, and all of these things. So corporate media, of course, is talking about GDP in Mexico and how they're not achieving 3.5 and 5% growth. They're at a very modest percentage. So you've got to recognize when those GDP numbers are coming out, what are they actually measuring? It's not necessarily household income, disposable income, and are people thriving, right? So that's Mexico. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I saw something interesting. It'd be meme that was going around though, where they were talking about Mexicans wanting to come to America for a better life, because of the richness of the U.S. and how much better their life would be. And people don't realize that Mexicans have had free healthcare since 2012,
Yeah, so their healthcare system, this is interesting because we were, at one time, we were contemplating retirement in a very nice portion of Mexico. And when I looked at Social Security here in the United States and the cost, right? So you have Part A, Part B, and then the lettered plans, or all of these programs here in the United States. In Mexico, they have a star system, right? So star one is the lowest tier, all the way up to the 5-star. And so when I priced policies as an outsider immigrating to Mexico, where the cost is higher, for a 5-star plan is $88 a month, and that covers everything. Now, compare that to the United States, where under Medicare, you're paying anywhere from $180 to $400, depending on who your provider is and which letter plan you buy. And then Part D, on the medication part, you're paying hundreds more, and then you hit that donut hole, have no coverage whatsoever for your medications until you pay an extra $2,500 for your medication. Then your benefits kick back in. So when we're comparing health outcomes, we have dental tourism Americans going to Mexico. So this whole idea of American exceptionalism is based on a fallacy that is just not supported by actual data. So this is why I found Mexico to be incredibly interesting in comparison. And I put it in here, even though their election was, 2 years ago, the effect today is the same, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Isn't it funny that the yearly cost for the best plan in Mexico won't even buy you a COVID test in the United States?
right, exactly. And God forbid if you should need treatment for COVID symptoms and
Oh,
complications.
the market will take care of you, Carrie. The market will fix
Really?
everything that's wrong with you.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the market, as it stands now, says it's cheaper for me to die.
Mm.
So yeah. Okay, so let's move over to Asia Pacific. Into no, wait. France was next. France.
Do you want to do France? We could do no. We could do. Let's do Hong Kong first.
Okay, so let's do Hong Kong because that has made national headlines, and even people in the U.S. are starting to understand what's going on in Hong Kong. All right, so let's back up a little bit. Hong Kong was a British colony. It was a pirate trading port for over 100 years, and these privateers got a lease from China to take Hong Kong Island and the surrounding area in Kowloon for 100 years.
Arr.
That lease expired in 1999, and the British then had to give Hong Kong back. So China did not extend the lease. Britain didn't ask for it. They just went, okay, here it goes. So what happened in that 100 years is Hong Kong became this huge commerce area. I mean, it's so much money is going through Hong Kong because it's a trade port. They have their own stock market. All of these things. I have a ghost walking around behind me. Sorry. So, so in Hong Kong, yeah, there's just you can just feel the amount of money. I mean, people would drive Bentleys and all of these cars. You would never see a BMW was a low end car. So the income inequality also was pretty high too. So what happened was China was trying to make Shanghai a competition for Hong Kong, and it just didn't work. Right. So when they took back control of Hong Kong, they wanted to rein it in because the people in Hong Kong actually don't speak Mandarin. They speak Cantonese. It's a different dialect, similar but different. People in Hong Kong don't consider themselves Chinese. They consider themselves Cantonese. So
Not to be
during that,
confused with Canton, Ohio.
right, definitely not the same. So you had this standalone territory, which was even more separate than Taiwan and China has been historically. So China said and promised that they would allow the Hong Kong people autonomy and they would just be part of the family, right? And as we know, in authoritarian regime, what they say and what they do are two different things. So slowly over time, China has been imposing more and more sanctions and restrictions on what the people can do there. So we're seeing these protests come out now, and a large part of that was because China and Hong Kong had decided that it was totally okay to pick up a dissident, a protester, somebody who spoke out against the regime, pick them up and ship them to China where they might never be seen again. They would end up in a concentration camp or worse. And so this is why you've started to see the people of Hong Kong out in the streets protesting. And I think the people in Portland and Seattle have taken note of some of the tactics that these students in Hong Kong were using to counter the police brutality, right? So this is what's going on in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong's elections were supposed to come up in the middle of the pandemic. So at the same time the US was hosting our primaries, Hong Kong was supposed to have its election. Hong Kong was very aggressive at treating the pandemic and doing shutdown and social distancing, and they were doing very well for a time. They're starting to enter their second phase now. Prior to this, the ruling elite decided to postpone the election, and the people in Hong Kong are crying foul. They're like, well, no, we know that because of the unrest and because of the policies that you have enacted over the last 9 to 10 months, you knew that the people themselves were going to vote against you and vote you out. And every indication is that is true. So, what we're looking for is those elections to actually be scheduled and Hong Kong, the people of Hong Kong, to cast their ballots. The expectation is that unless there's some serious shenanigans, which is always possible, um, you will see Hong Kong go to a more left leaning type of representation. And that's going to be interesting because the US, two things happen. And these are significant, and you might have missed it. So, Mike Pompeo, again, had come out in support on behalf of the US for Hong Kong and Hong Kong's autonomy, and then quickly reversed within a month or two and made the statement, and this is important, that the US recognizes that Hong Kong is a territory of China. That's huge. That
That's
is especially,
massive.
yeah,
Right?
exactly. So at the time, it was a raised eyebrow and it made me kind of nervous. Now we understand why. So the headlines just last week came out about Trump and his personal business dealings in China and the number of taxes that he's paying. So I would predict that there's a quid pro quo there. So not only is the emoluments clause in the US being violated, but I expect that US national foreign policy was manipulated because of that. So that was a really big deal, especially when it came to the Cantonese people, to see the U.S. formally recognize their relationship to China as merely a province, not a sovereign area.
Now, and isn't it funny that it just shows you the stupidity of Trump, right? That the stones and glass houses routine, where we're gonna impose sanctions on imports and all this stuff, and not realizing that there's so much more that China can do to you because of your shady dealings all over the world, right? Like, it's just ridiculous how he gets himself in trouble with these things, right?
Oh, absolutely. And China, what was interesting, and I don't have the headline in front of me, but it was about a month or two ago. China was trying to extradite dissidents in the United States. And the dissidents here, there were one in Washington, one in California, and I don't recall their names. They were really nervous because the Trump administration was opening talks to allow that to happen. And that would be the first time it has ever happened. And
Right.
these two dissidents had achieved naturalized status in the United States. So that adds an extra layer of legal complication that, for all intents and purposes, the Trump administration could sweep aside and just hand them over.
Right. And
So,
there's a Canadian connection in all of this as well, because this is a story that in Canada, not necessarily something that you're going to hear in the U.S., but we had a run in with China with some diplomats as well. That there was a Chinese group that was caught spying in Canada, and so they were, sent out of the country, and China retaliated by arresting Canadians living in China, including one gentleman who is considered an expert on Chinese relations in our government, and he's being held by Beijing for the last 2 years, right?
that's incredible.
Yeah, like, I mean, this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon, and this is the problem when you deal with a communist regime like China. They've the misinformation campaign that always comes out of there, right? And so you don't get to control the narrative, right? That's
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 correct.
always the case, right? That's another thing that was an error on Trump's behalf, is thinking that he had the upper hand on China, and turns out he doesn't. you know,
No, and I think, Putin himself said it early on when he was talking about Trump came away from their initial conversation saying that, oh, yeah, we came to an understanding, we love each other. And Putin's quietly saying that guy's an idiot. I
Well, I
mean,
don't think he's the only one.
no, he's not, but it's one of those things where you have the rest of the diplomatic world and leadership who has some grasp on policy and how things actually work. And then you have somebody like Trump come along. They're like, this guy's ripe for the picking,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Exactly. My question with Hong Kong is: were there any pirates in the protests?
not this one, not this one. I
No.
think, uh,
That's too bad because they dress so colorfully. I mean, the protest would just
we
We're mad at China because they're trying to steal our booty.
right. No, I think my biggest regret looking back at Hong Kong, so in the lead up to the turnover, I am aware of talks with leadership in Hong Kong, particularly the dissident leadership, asking them to apply to the UN for sovereign nation status. So if you look to Singapore, Singapore has that. It's a city nation status. Singapore is largely a city with surrounding provinces, and they are autonomous and sovereign. So the goal was to do the same for Hong Kong, but you had the Chinese coming in with very sweet words and promises. So they never applied to the UN for that status. And now I can't help but wonder, had they done that, would we see things quite a bit different in that particular region of Asia?
There's one other thing that people don't talk about, and this is a result of being old and just remembering what it used to be like. Because you now, and people know this, right? Because they turn over any plastic product or Amazon product or from anywhere, and you turn it over, and it says "Made in China" on it, right? Well, that wasn't always the case. When I was growing up as a kid, when you turned over anything bought and purchased, it said "Made in Hong Kong," right? There was very little things that were actually made in China, right? So the industry that is now in China used to be in Hong Kong. So you have to ask yourself, well, if the 80s ushered in free trade deals with China that allowed corporations to go and manufacture their product so that they could pay the workers peanuts in order to maximize profits for those corporations, the harvesting, quote unquote, of Hong Kong by China can be seen as a way of stifling their ability to be the manufacturer of choice and switching that over to China. You have to remember that the Chinese, they're the way that they've gone about cornering those manufacturing markets is amazing, right? That they're basically they create everything there, and it's not by chance, right? And the other thing about these corporations that went to China to build things, right? You had to sign an agreement with the Chinese government that after a certain number of years, the Chinese took controlling interest of those factories that made them, right? That was the price to build in China. So,
Right. Excellent point. Excellent point. And I think this is just another example of um, a hostile takeover in business and the corruption of capitalism, where you've got literally tiger chasing its tail.
yes,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely, and I've always said that about large corporations of short-term thinking and profits now versus profits later, and the people that are in charge wanting to get their share of the pie and screw everybody else because when I retire, what do I care, right?
right. Golden parachute. Yep. So let's move on to France, because I think this one is pretty telling as well.
Absolutely.
So with France, and Andy, help me with the pronunciation, Macron.
Macron.
Thank you. Um, while he was narrowly reelected as a center right policy maker, what just happened in the provinces, particularly the mayor of Paris and surrounding areas, socialists were elected. So what you saw was the yellow vest protests that were really just ramping up when Macron, and I'm butchering that.
No, that was actually good.
Okay, thank you. So when he was reelected, and then those yellow vest protests have continued. And what they were fighting for was, basic rights as workers and not to have their overtime diminished. So these are just basic things they're asking for and weren't being listened to, so they took to the streets. And what happened as a result in these last wave of elections during the pandemic, you had a growing number of leftists and even socialists, like the mayor of Paris, elected. So I think that is another trend where the pendulum is swinging back towards people, working families, and things like that, because they recognize with their position in the EU. And Andy, I do feel like we are way overdue in talking about African Francophone countries and what France is actually doing. Imperialist push in Africa.
Yes.
That's a whole nother segment
Yes.
that I think we really need to tackle. But with France's position in the EU, it's tenuous at best because of their relationship there, and then how they're going to support their people, and the nationalism push, not necessarily from an alt-right perspective, but from the worker perspective, right?
Yeah.
That solidarity effort. So I think that scared quite a few people, particularly in the EU and in the UK with the Brexit vote. So before we run out of time, I really want to get to Scotland, because this is near and dear to me, and I think it's very telling. And when you start to peel back what's going on, you can see the relationship between imperialism and capitalism run amok, and it's going on in the UK. So with Scotland in 2014, it was the first time formally that the people of Scotland had an opportunity to vote for independence. They are part of the UK, part of considered England, this type of thing. They don't have the same autonomy that Ireland has, right? So being of Irish descent, I thought it was incredulous, because all of the blood, sweat, tears, and genocide that we had to go through to get independence, Scotland just had to vote, right? So I was like, why wouldn't you? And they didn't. And the reason for that, we found out after the fact. So at the same time Scotland was voting for their independence, the Brexit vote was starting to bubble up. Should we leave? If Scotland's going to go, should we leave the EU and go back to the pound and our sovereignty? And there are many arguments back and forth. So what was happening, and we see the same thing here in the US, is the propaganda went out in force and was kind of changing the narrative on what that would mean for Scotland. So for those people who don't know the relationship between Scotland and the UK from an economic standpoint, arguably resources, manpower, effort, GDP growth, all of these sort of things, Scotland is the economic engine of the UK. And the reason I say that is, the way the economy works right now, the largest reserves of oil are off the coast of Scotland, not in the Middle East, right? So, and Scotland has also gone over to sustainable renewable energy. They're putting up these windmills and using the ocean currents to generate energy. Plus, they've got nuclear energy and all of these things going on in Scotland. Their fisheries, their mining, all of these things. Scotland, not the UK in totality, and certainly not in Britain, right? Britain, remember, these are islands.
Yes,
right?
and we have to make sure that people understand that when you talk about the UK includes, currently Scotland, but it also includes Wales, and it also includes Northern Ireland, right, which is separate from Ireland, which is its own sovereign state itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about what happened when the European Union came into the forefront, and the central government in Belgium basically took away the monetary sovereignty of pretty much all of the Western European countries that are now part of the EU, right? That was a huge deal, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's led to p- real issues in countries like Italy and Greece, right? Because they're no longer monetary sovereign, and they were highly in debt. They're no longer the currency issuer. Now they're a currency user, and that's a big deal. But the one thing that the UK was able to do was to have a stipulation that when they joined the EU, they were allowed to keep the British pound. So they were allowed to keep their monetary sovereignty, right? And
Right.
so when Brexit came around, that was a very interesting time. And I think that most people around the world don't understand why Brexit occurred and what it actually meant. And we could get into that and probably do an entire show about it, and how that framed the election, and got the centrists back into power, or the Tories back into power there, right, by a campaign of disinformation, which, gee, that sounds familiar. But Scotland, they're just sick of it, right? They have their own resources. They have, a very good opportunity to become a sovereign nation with their natural resources, which means that if they float their currency on the open market, there's a very good possibility that they will become monetarily sovereign. And then they can distance themselves from all the bullshit that's going on in the UK right now. And in fact, we just
Yeah.
had a conversation on macaroni and cheese with Warren Mosler, who, you know, is one of the fathers of uh, modern monetary theory. And he and Stephanie Kelton are part of the advising committee in Scotland that are showing them how to move forward with their own fiat currency. So I find that very interesting. So if Scotland decides to do that, they could instantly become a sovereign nation that can start making changes for the better. And it really sounds like they want to, right? That their citizenry are, you know, woke to what happens, what neoliberalism has done to different parts of the world, and they don't want anything to do with it. So I find that extremely interesting, and more power to them.
Well, absolutely. And one of the links that I posted in the comments here was this proposal that was just published by the National Scot. And this is the group that is forwarding the argument to gain independence for Scotland. So what they're actually doing is, whereas Brexit, you're still waiting for a plan from the Tories. So many years later, after, it's like you said, the disinformation campaign, they still don't have their act together. So what the leadership in Scotland did, and I did not know Kelton and Mosler were involved in this, so it makes sense. They just published their plan, their exit plan, which includes national sovereignty, currency, border controls, trade. And their base argument actually comes from a financial component, because they're saying that with Brexit, then Scotland exports, and they export more than the rest of the UK in bigger industries. They would have to pay the VAT tax through the UK and then pay it again to trade with the EU, which is going to cost them too much money. So their plan that they just published allows them to operate as a sovereign nation globally and then remain part of the EU as a separate sovereign nation status that lowers their VAT tax for trade with the rest of the EU, which is really smart. And then one other thing that I have long been a critic of is, this is where the imperialism comes from. And, obviously, from Irish descent, I always look at this in a negative light. So when you have parliament and Westminster, and you have, what is it, 650 districts represented in Westminster. That is all of the UK, and you have this huge nation state above you called Scotland, and you give them 59 seats. So basically, what you've done is you've invited them to the party, but given them no voice and no say. And you can see that in the policies that affect the Scottish people. From coast to coast, they are always marginalized, and their resources and things taken for the benefits of London and the rest of the UK. So even though they do get some monetary support back, it does not equal the resources and value that the Scottish people themselves are providing to the UK. So that has always been my chief complaint. That's like in the US, where you give Rhode Island more of a voice than you would give to New York or California. And it kind of goes to our electoral college debate, but it is so pronounced with the way their parliament works there that for the life of me, I just could not see why a person in Scotland would even want to remain part of the UK without a level of autonomy and an equal voice.
Yes,
So,
absolutely, and that goes part and parcel what you're saying with that, the meme that I just saw, right, that came out about representation in the federal government in the United States, right? I mean, you have equal representation between California, that has 40 million people in it, and 23 states that also have 40 million people in it. And the difference is two representatives and 46 representatives, right, for equal amounts of people.
that's exactly right. Exactly right. So in just a generalized summary, with all of these countries that we've talked about, the elections and the way that people are actually waking up to what is actually going on, to me, I find it encouraging and hopeful that the American population will see what's going on if you choose to tune in, because corporate media doesn't really cover this. And in fact, the headlines about Bolivia have largely been buried because they don't like that narrative. But what I'm hoping is that after our elections here in November, if Trump and his administration get removed, that the people of this country will not stop, not go back to sleep, go back to brunch or whatever it is they're doing, but continue to understand economics at a household, state, and national level better than we have in the past. Right, the federal appropriations. These are topics that we need to understand much better. And I think that the argument with the francophone countries in Africa is a good example of the difference between state spending and federal spending. When you have these countries now this is a poor example, but when you have the African countries who are supposed to be sovereign but cannot create their own money, what does that do? And what effect does that have on the relationship, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
it makes a huge difference. And you know, Fadl Kaboub is one that has championed the Africa's Pandemic Response Initiative that's just happened in September. As a,
can we get him on to talk about that?
it's yeah, it would probably be something that would have to be pre-recorded because Professor Kaboub has a day job.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Well,
you know, he's such a amazing guy, as an academic and a economist. I've heard him say that he's as comfortable in his activist T-shirt as he is the suit and tie that he uses when he teaches students, right? So, yeah, he's such a hardworking guy and trying to get the message of sovereignty, monetary sovereignty, out to people. So, if he could do it, I know he would, right? And it's just a matter of nailing down a time to get him in here because he is such an eloquent speaker and knows this stuff so well that it would certainly be worth our while to try to have him come on the show if we could get him.
Yeah, I think because it's such a relevant example and so stark, right? So what's going on there is just you talk about injustice, and it provides such a clear example that we can translate into these other areas, countries, and economies in a relevant way. So yeah, let's work on Dr. Kaboob and see if we can get him on and record it if we need to. So that was all I had. That was my rundown on international. Obviously, I didn't cover 133 different countries, but these were some of the high points that I thought were relevant to the U.S. elections and global politics. So
yes, and it's encouraging. I think that our takeaways from this is that despite American imperialism and the regime change war efforts that have occurred since pretty much every single conflict that's happened since World War II, despite all of those things, there's still enough of a grassroots strength in these countries that says, no, we're not going to deal with this anymore. We're not going to take the American crap. We're not going to become another Haiti or Guatemala or El Salvador or any of the Middle Eastern countries. It's just, we want to control ourselves. America, leave us alone, go away.
Yep, which I think is fair. I mean, if we talk about injustice for all, let's work on our own backyard. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So that's all I got. We'll be back Friday, bright and early.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts, Andy? You want to take us out?
Yeah, we're probably gonna head back and be domestic on Friday because we'll have an entirely new debate to talk about. What I call.
Is that what we're calling it?
Yes.
It's still a debate. Okay.
Yes, interrupt debate number 2.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting again, right? We just just wanted to briefly talk about. I don't know if you saw this or not, but since its inception, which has been pretty much forever, the CBS 60 Minutes is a show that I like to watch. But Deb and I will sit and watch that on Saturday evening, and this week coming up is the pre-election show where they sit down with the Democratic Republican candidates and do an interview with them, and then they interview the VP picks as well. And apparently during Trump's interview, he got mad at the questions and got up and left.
No, I missed that.
Yes. And then on top of everything, he tweeted out, a picture of what's her name there, Leslie Stahl, not wearing a mask. He said she came into the White House not wearing a mask, which was horseshit. She just took it off for the interview, right?
Right.
And then more to come. And now he's threatening to release the interview himself before it airs on 60 Minutes.
Unedited, or is that too much to ask?
Well, who knows? I think that anybody that is planning on watching the Trump segment should take a surgical mask and put it over the speaker on their television just to be on the safe side.
Just to be on the safe side, yeah. COVID party 2020.
Woohoo. I think there was a statistic that showed that the week that Trump got COVID, there were more infections in the White House than there were in 4 or 5 countries in the Asian territory that had a population of over 128 million.
And that's a true fact.
Yes, that's an actual fact. They got more infections in the White House. Oh, well.
Yeah, America.
Woo-hoo!
All right, on that note, let's get out of here, and we'll be back on Friday.
Yep, that sounds good, Kerri. Take care, everyone.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.